Chairman, thank you very much for holding the hearing. To you and Senator Risch, I appreciate your focus on China. I noted the commitment to an April 14th markup of the China bill. I thank you for that. It's timely. So many great questions to ask, but Mr. Khan, I want to start with you. You talked about the need for us to enhance our own research here to keep up with China. You talked about artificial intelligence in particular, and you talked about the semiconductor crisis we face right now without a supply chain that's reliable. Let me just ask you two quick questions if I could. In the National Defense Authorization Act, we got the CHIPS Act included. It's an authorization. It would require a $37 billion appropriations to make it effective. Then we also got AI legislation in, including some members of this committee, and I worked on this, and it's called the AI Initiative Act, as you know, and it is about the government, the federal government's coordination of artificial intelligence response and research. That would require a $6 billion commitment. Do you support those levels of funding? And if not, do you support more or less? What's the appropriate amount of funding from the taxpayers to work with the private sector to enhance our ability to keep up with China and to surpass them, hopefully, in some of these areas?
Yeah, Senator, thanks for the great questions. Yes, I do support those ranges of funding for the CHIPS Act. That would certainly work as an initial down payment, and depending on the effectiveness of incentives and the other programs in the CHIPS Act, we can consider later appropriating even additional funds on top of that. I do think that keeping semiconductor manufacturing in the United States is an absolutely critical national security priority. Right now, the supply chains for this technology are too centralized, and there's a lot of risks that we could be cut off. And so it should be a very high priority. And I think even those levels of funding are actually quite cost effective.
Well, thank you.
Go ahead.
I look at what's happening to the auto industry in Ohio and elsewhere around the country, and we're literally stopping production of automobiles right now. Over 200,000 cars were not made this year that would have been made but for the semiconductors, and we're totally dependent on Taiwan, as you know, and China's developing quickly. Another point, Mr. Chairman, on the China legislation, we have legislation called Securing the American Innovation Act, and it comes from a year-long investigation by the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, a deep dive, bipartisan. And what we were able to reveal, sadly, was that for 2 decades now, China has been systematically targeting promising American researchers, promising American research paid for by the U.S. taxpayer, and taking it to China to improve their conditions, including the rise of the Chinese military and the economy. And we've begun to crack down on it finally. You've seen a number of arrests by the FBI and the U.S. attorney's offices, but frankly, we need legislation to give them more tools to be able to deal with it. So as we put more money into some of our research institutions in order to respond to the threat from China economically, we've got to be sure we're protecting that money. So I appreciate Senator Risch, Senator Coons, and others in the committee who have been co-sponsors of that legislation. And I hope it can be included in whatever final China bill we have, because it provides what we need to ensure that we have that balance. We need foreign researchers to work with our researchers here, but we also need to take common steps to prevent bad actors from taking that research, which has been done over, again, 2 decades. On the issue of China, Dr. Economy, I want to talk to you about what we're doing with the Global Engagement Center. This is to try to push back on disinformation and propaganda. China is very good at it. Last year, Senator Booker and I chaired an oversight hearing of this committee on combating disinformation, and the expert witnesses told us that China spends over $10 billion annually in state-sponsored disinformation operations, $10 billion annually. And so my question to you, Dr. Economy, is can you elaborate a little on China's use of disinformation? It's inexpensive. It's got a lot of deniability attached to it. I listened carefully to what Senator Shaheen said about Latin America. They're certainly engaged in it there and in Africa. What are the most pressing areas where you have studied China disinformation campaigns, and why do they use this tactic, and what should we be doing to push back against it?
Thank you, Senator. Certainly, look, we're right in the midst of a Chinese disinformation campaign ourselves, right? As the Chinese are spreading untruths about the United States as the source of the COVID-19, So I think, obviously shedding light and pushing back against Chinese efforts is critical. But I think in other countries that have a less robust free press, one of the greatest concerns in my mind, if you look in Africa, for example, where Chinese media companies are managing not only, for example, the digitization of villages in Kenya, but also providing the content for, Kenyan television in many villages. And the newspapers are basically doing what they used to do with AP. It's much cheaper. They can just get for free from Renmin Ribao or China Daily. And so what you're getting in many developing countries now are just a flood of Chinese information. And so it's a little bit different maybe from disinformation, but it's a close second because it's basically spreading a Chinese narrative and, cutting out access to, other sources of information. For example, in Kenya, they price access to the BBC and other international stations at a higher rate to dissuade people from buying, access to that kind of information. So, look, they influenced the recent Taiwanese elections, or attempted to. They spread all sorts of disinformation over the course of a COVID-19 pandemic about other countries' responses. I think that the most important thing we can do is simply to shed light on the lies, to push back against them, and act in concert with our allies on this. So our best response is sort of the transparency that's inherent in our own system.
Well, I think my time is up, but the Global Engagement Center is directed at all those things, and Senator Murphy and I have attempted to get more funding into it for that reason, because it does support a free press, as an example, to get to the truth in those countries. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.